Coming up, we focus on America and the patterns of evidence as well as the Pilgrims. America's Hope starts now.
This is America's Hope from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Kelly Wright.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Wright. Welcome to a brand new edition of America's Hope. We're glad that you could join us wherever you are. I hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. History matters, and there are patterns of evidence to show us why it is so important to focus on our spiritual history and our physical history, our DNA of what makes America the nation that it's become known as, a beacon of hope, a light that still shines in darkness as a city on a hill. But we've got a lot of work to do. Tim Mahoney's dropping by to talk to us about that. He's also the publisher, or the producer, I should say, of the movie American Miracle. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Jerry Newcombe, who takes us all the way back to the very founders of the Mayflower Compact. And that, of course, are the Pilgrims. Let's get started. And welcome back to America's Hope. My next guest, and I'm delighted to introduce him, Tim Mahoney. He joins us now. If any of you have ever seen the series Patterns of Evidence, then you know this gentleman and what he's been able to accomplish. But in 2022, he established and founded Heroic Films. As a result of that, he's been able to tell incredible stories about the history of heroes like George Washington. And he has a new film coming out in 2025 about America. It's called The American Miracle, and our history, our nation is no accident. Tim, good to have you on. Before we get into the film about America, which will come out in 2025, everyone's been watching what's unfolding in Israel. And through Patterns of Evidence, you started establishing and noting the Israel dilemma. Talk to us about that project and how dear it is to you.
What happened was, back in 2002, I had heard about activity with people searching for chariot wheels and all that in the Red Sea, and I was fascinated by that. And that led me to go to Egypt, and eventually in 2007, I had an experience where we knew we had to go to Israel. And when I got to Israel, our Israeli producer asked me, well, who do you want to talk to? And I said, I want to talk to the leaders of your nation. And I said, Shimon Peres, Benjamin Netanyahu, the ambassadors, the rabbis. And it had to be God that would put that kind of courage in my heart. But I felt I had something I was supposed to be refilming, and I wasn't exactly sure what it was. And I got an interview with Benjamin Netanyahu and Shimon Peres that was, I would have to just say, there's a certain aspect of it that seemed supernatural as I was able to have that interview. And that footage has never been seen before. Much of it, the interviews, they lasted for quite some time. And we went into the origin of the people of Israel. And people have seen these interviews and said, I've never heard them talk like that before. So that it was the genesis of when we had this October last year attack. I knew that I had to make a decision, and it seemed like this was the time to bring out this question about, well, who are these people? Because the Bible has prophecies about the nation of Israel, many prophecies about the coming of the Messiah and all these different things that I look at when we look at patterns, Kelly. And that's been the scientific approach that we've taken. So I never intended to make a film called The Israel Dilemma, but when these things happened, then I started realizing that I had to pay attention to what was going on. And I think there's a warning in what's going on right now for all of us. And that's the reason why I wanted to go back to the beginning, so we could understand the context of this situation in Israel.
So when we look at this, and you've aptly called it the Israel dilemma, what is the dilemma about Israel, since the world is always flummoxed and outraged to some degree with the rise in anti-Semitism and with the hatred expressed towards Israel following October 7th, 2023, when they set out to defend themselves as this tiny nation surrounded by adversaries?
If we go back to the history of the world, and the whole idea of in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, that came from Moses being inspired by God to write the first 5 books of the Bible. And Kelly, what's fascinating is that the whole idea that something came from nothing actually was written thousands of years ago by Moses. But at the same time, Moses was leading these people out of Egypt. And Moses tells us the story of creation, and he tells us the story of these people eventually turning away from God. And then there's the story of the flood, and God starts all over again. And then there's the story of the Tower of Babel. And all these nations that are around the world, there's only one that becomes this special group of people called Israel, because Abraham decided that he would listen to God and he would go, and God would promised him that through him all nations would be blessed. So that's what I'm looking at. And there's this one group of people that all the scriptures have come from. God has given this group of people at times these prophets and these writers like Moses and Ezekiel and Isaiah, Jeremiah, and we're going to be bringing those characters back to life in this movie, The Israel Dilemma. And we're going to basically be highlighting what they wrote, because when God reveals his plan and at Mount Sinai, he makes a covenant with this group of people that they will be his people. They're supposed to be a light to the world. And then throughout history, this group of people falls in and out of their relationship with God. And we have evidences of that. And when people see this movie, it's going to be in theaters November 13th, 14th, and 17th. They can go to patternsofevidence.com, and they can buy tickets for it. And this story is important for us to understand, because there's more that's going to be unfolding here. And I think we're living in a time when the nation of Israel is somewhat of a thermometer for God's activity in the world. It always has been.
Yeah, and as you're talking, let me take a moment and show some of the people an excerpt of this movie, The Israel Dilemma. We'll show this trailer right now. We'll have you come back to talk more about it. Watch this.
But your name shall be Abraham.
I also antagonized a lot of people by recognizing the state of Israel as soon as it was formed.
Where's your title to the land? He said, he held up the Bible and he said, here's the title. You don't lose your right to your home because somebody kicked you out.
The Torah came before the land. It's not by accident.
Patterns of Evidence Foundation presents
The covenants are what holds the storyline together.
a film that asks if God made a covenant with the children of Israel.
God's covenants are everlasting. There will be other things disappearing from the natural cosmos before I break my covenant. I will never break my covenant.
The God of Israel cares about all human beings, and therefore in the caring for Israel, he's expressing his love and concern for all humanity.
What evidence remains today?
Well, David is part of the history of early Israel, which has been maligned for some time because there was not solid archaeological evidence. That's all changed in the last decade.
Debate rages over the truth of biblical prophecy.
So they collect all these traditions, stories, myth, theological stories, and so on. We are dealing with the traditions.
The scriptures predict events hundreds, sometimes thousands of years off into the future, and they do so with a reliability that is breathtaking.
What will the pattern reveal?
If they break the covenant, there are consequences.
That's right. Before you get out of the Pentateuch, the whole basic plot line is there.
Patterns of Evidence, The Israel Dilemma.
So, Tim, from that particular episode, we can see that this is quite a film, that you've actually gone in to dissect these personalities called by God, and yet it represents the Abrahamic faith. The Abrahamic faith encompasses Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and yet it seems that all three are at odds with each other, and the rest of the world is at odds with Israel. But it also shows, I would think through your Patterns of Evidence series and Israel Dilemma, it shows that Israel did not really begin in 1948. It goes way beyond that.
It sure does. In fact, in this investigation, we're looking for a pattern. It says that God made a covenant with, with these people. And Moses writes in Deuteronomy, he says, listen, there's blessings if you obey God, and there's curses if you disobey God. And if you break God's covenant by worshiping other deities, these false gods, he says, you're going to be destroyed as a nation. You're going to be scattered. You're going to be persecuted, but in the future you'll return. And so when the film begins, we actually start looking for these different steps.
It is a stunning development that you've put together here, the Israel Dilemma, and then going into the history of it, looking at the spiritual aspect as well as historical aspect of all of this, because it all blends together. I'm curious, what have critics had to say about this, and what have you encountered along the way from people to say, I never saw it the way you've explained it? Did the light go on for them?
Well, this is so new and so fresh that it's just coming out right now. But I'll tell you this, the people who have seen it have because I've been trying to get endorsers and endorsements, they're saying, wow, no one's ever really put it together in this way. So you could see all the evidence.
I'm delighted you're talking about this. I find this history and these prophetic statements that we see in the Bible so fascinating. And I marvel at it, even as a journalist, looking and say, well, how can you not talk about this? This is an incredible journey through a piece of history that keeps getting larger and larger and becoming ever more present. And I find it a fascinating project that you developed, and it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the world responds.
People are concerned about their investments, but they don't think about their spiritual investment. And there are laws of the universe, and and that one of those laws is do we acknowledge the very heavens declare the glory of God. So I think that I'm hoping that this film is a wake-up call for all of us. Not that I could produce anything that would be that grand or anything, but I'm doing my part because I saw something and I knew I had to respond, that there was something here.
I'm talking to Tim Mahoney. The film is called The Israel Dilemma. It's coming out in November. And so by the time that you're seeing this show, it is November. Go see this film. Listen, this is not the only film that you've made and we want to talk about America and how you have been able to do that. We'll do that on the other side of the break. You're watching America's Hope, and I'm talking to Tim Mahoney, founder and owner of Heroic Pictures. Coming back with a lot more next. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm joined by Tim Mahoney. We were having a fascinating discussion about his new film that's coming out in November. And what are the dates again, Tim, that it's hitting theaters?
November 13th, 14th, and 17th, and they can go to patternsofevidence.com and get tickets, and get tickets soon, because the theaters can sell those tickets. We're only in the theater for 3 days, and it's a Wednesday, Thursday, and a Sunday, November 13th, 14th, and 17th. Yep.
All right, so it's called Israel Dilemma. And now you've done something else too. That this particular film is coming out in 2025, and we have featured a discussion with you as well as other people involved in the film, or at least helping you produce it. And that's this incredible story called The American Miracle. Our nation was not an accident. Talk to me about this particular film and what you think it will mean for Americans who perhaps have their history kind of twisted.
Right. Well, this was from a book by Michael Medved, and he is a radio commentator, author, film critic, and he wrote this narrative about Americans' forgotten history, of God acting in history. And the reason he did it is because his family suffered through being in other nations, in Ukraine, where many of his family members were killed and taken in the Holocaust and in wars. And so as he grew up here, his father said, "This is the greatest nation in the world, and you need to know about it, and you need to know why." So this film looks at the founding of America. And right now, there's so many people that are critical. There's this narrative that America is evil, that America's founding was built on greed. I completely disagree, and many historians do. And this film is a testimony to what happened in the very beginning. And I think it's there's a warning in this film. We've got a lot of the top scholars that are in it, but it's a docudrama, so there's an awful lot of dramatic scenes. And we focus on the character of George Washington. Young George Washington was spared multiple times supernaturally from death. And also during the time of the Revolutionary War, the colonial army, they were saved from defeat many times through weather events and other things that was supernatural. And this film is going to bring you into those events. And it's called The American Miracle. People can sign up to at AmericanMiracleMovie.com and get updates on behind the scenes of the making of the film, and learn about it and get the word out. And Kelly, I think the thing that I realized is the price of citizenship. Being a citizen is so important, and I'm asking myself, why did I why was I involved with this particular film? And after we're going to show you how the Constitution came to be. We're going to take you through the war in this movie. We're going to take you through the eyes of George Washington, all the way through to the founders in Constitutional Hall, working out the issues of slavery, working out the issues of states' rights and a federal government, and how they created a separation of powers and why that was important. But I think the most important part of this is that citizenship, there was a great price, and there is a great price to it. And some of us are not being good participants in being a citizen. And Richard Dreyfuss actually wanted to be in this movie, and he's in this movie talking about civics and about, if we don't do something now, we could lose this nation. For the type of nation that it was will be gone. And that's why this film, I think, is so important, The American Miracle.
Well, and to your point, I hope that every member of Congress, the President of the United States, I hope that people in every school in America, every classroom, every church, every synagogue, every mosque get a chance to watch this, because of what it tries to actually show about the American miracle.
Yes, it's an important, unforgotten. It's been forgotten. We don't want it to be forgotten. Somewhat. The fact that our rights come from God. In other words, they weren't from the king. That's what the founders said. They hold these truths evident. That these things, there's unalienable rights that come from God, and that not man. And the government doesn't give us these rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, here's the reality: is Americans are just throughout history, humans are sinful creatures. We even talk about that in the film. We have a Princeton scholar, Robert George, who talks about how the American, process has failed many people. They haven't lived up to it. But the Constitution was the good thing. That it's a good thing, but it's an ideal that's hard every generation to live up to. And that is that the Constitution hasn't failed. The principles haven't failed. It's the people have failed the principles, and that's because of our sinful nature. And some people don't believe in sin, but I don't know what you call it, but people don't act right to each other many times. And what the Bible tells us is that that's the sinful nature. And the founding fathers knew that men were fallen, and if they had power, if they had too much power, that they would use it against the other people. And that's what we're in threat of right now. And so that's the reason why this understanding of a separation of powers was so critical. And that's the reason why millions of people have wanted to leave their countries and come to this country because they saw something that was created that would give them an opportunity to be free and to have liberty and to prosper in a way that they couldn't in some other nation.
Tim, I'm delighted that you did this project, and I know that it has changed you and helped you and deepened your resolve and your faith in God. And then I like the fact that you've gone out there with patterns of evidence and you've produced the Israel Dilemma. Based on everything that you've been doing in your career, what does it do for you having hope for America and the world?
Well, I think that what we see is that God is acting throughout history. And part of it is not being distracted in our own ways with our own lives, but there is activity that God has. And I think what that encourages me is that this isn't just a chaotic universe. There's a purpose behind it. And in I think my faith has been encouraged there, and I think it helps for people to see these films to be inspired. One of the things that happened, we opened this segment by talking about heroic pictures. We live according to story. Our heroes that we have, and you and I grew up with great heroes. What's happened in the recent years is that we don't have heroic people anymore that are, we have criminals that are heroes. We've got evil people that are heroes. And so they've taken the center of good out of story and shifted it. So that's the reason why heroic pictures is important. I felt God was calling me to make heroic stories again because people needed to see that, because God created us for story. Dogs don't tell stories. Cats don't tell stories. It's humans. And God uses story in order for us to kind of shape our compass, our moral compass, our spiritual compass. And that's why story isn't so important. And that's the reason why there's more and more people like myself that are saying, we need to get back to heroic stories, stories that will inspire us.
I really appreciate all the work you're doing. Praying for you to keep doing great things. Tim Mahoney, right here on America's Hope.
Thank you.
We're back with more in just a moment. And welcome back to America's Hope. I'm delighted to introduce our next guest, Dr. Jerry Newcombe. He's one of the nation's leading voices of American history with a Christian perspective, and he has a new documentary called The Pilgrims. And through this, he steps back into history to celebrate Thanksgiving. You know, first of all, Jerry, it's good to have you on. You have extensive research and historical evidence that provides a good look at the Pilgrims, and it shines light into details that many of us may not know. Enlighten us about why you developed this documentary.
Well, initially I was working on it because the 400th anniversary of Plymouth, 1620 to 2020. So it's actually something that's been in the works for quite a while. I thought that was a very important anniversary because the Pilgrims, even though they were small and they were an outcast group,